Hello, hello, a very big warm welcome. We want to appreciate you guys and thank you for joining our call tonight. I am Corey Beagley, Senior Sales Manager of US and Canada. Tonight we have a very special call, guys, and again, we appreciate you being here. We have the one and only Tyler Norton is going to be joining us for our executive leadership training. Today is Tuesday, August 21st. Time is flying. School's already starting back up. It's crazy. And it's 7 p.m., so you're in the right spot. Before we get to Tyler tonight, we want to go through just a few quick announcements. And really, guys, we cannot thank you enough for being here. I know that it definitely is a sacrifice. I'm a big believer in short-term sacrifices bring long-term rewards. So being here tonight, there's so many things you could do on a Tuesday night. By being here, this is definitely going to help you with your long-term goals. And as you continue to make these short-term sacrifices, that's how you're going to, one step at a time to your goals. A few announcements. Like I mentioned, we do have our promotion going on right now with ASEA Via. It's the get one free. So if you're not familiar with this promotion, it's going on now until the end of August. So we have just about 2 more weeks left. And how this one works, guys, it's very simple. And it's one of our best promotions ever. Buy 2 Source, get a 3rd free. Buy 2 Biome, get a 3rd free. Buy 2 Life Max, get a 3rd Life Max free. And if you buy all 3, we'll throw in an extra 50 LRP points as well. So again, this one is a great opportunity to stack up, to stock up, to share with your friends, good opportunities to build your business. More volume equals more commissions, right? Get a nice little bump in those paychecks. So again, this one goes until the end of August. So this week and next week remain for this promotion. Another promotion that's going on right now is the Earn Your Way to Convention. Convention is right around the corner. Everyone is kind of going crazy, getting busy here in the office. There's so much to do. We are so excited for convention. Just a ton of incredible activities and different events and different people that are going to be coming to this event. So much that we have going on. It's going to be a convention like never before. You guys have been working so hard with this promotion, and it's so amazing to see everybody from our directors and associates all the way to our Diamonds, Ambassador Diamonds, working hard and earning their way to convention. This one ends this Friday, guys, so keep that in mind. I had a couple people reach out to me today. They're just 1 or 2 orders away from getting that 3rd prize or even 1st or 2nd. The prize levels are not just tickets to our convention, but you're also getting travel reimbursement. Going back to those sacrifices, we know it's a sacrifice to get to convention, but we also know that those who attend are able to better and more effectively build their business. So doing everything we can to help get you guys there, get your teams there. And again, we appreciate how hard you've worked with this promotion. We're excited to see the additional individuals and associates that are able to attend convention because of this promotion. And my last little announcement, I love to end with our mission here, to better people's lives and to be a force for good in the world. And I wanted to end with this one by also introducing our incredible founder, Tyler Norton. I have been with the company for about 3 months now, and it has been such a blessing and just an incredible opportunity to learn from Tyler. He is one of the best examples of living our mission. I had an incredible opportunity to travel home with him. We shared the same car. We're on the same flight together, and it was a little intimidating, not gonna lie. His resume, just, the experience he has, I was kind of nervous, but the second he takes time to spend with you and just gets on your level and makes it so easy, and he's so relatable. We could talk about things, the 30, 40-minute car ride felt like 2 minutes, and he is just an incredible individual. We're so lucky to have him. So lucky to have him tonight. Sacrificed time away from his family, and I know he's busy with convention as well. So I want to introduce our founder. I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to him. Give me just a second here, everyone. I will bring up Tyler here in just 1 second. All right, Tyler, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me okay?
There we go.
Great. Are you able to see me on your screen okay, Corey?
Yep, I see you great. Great audio, great visual. We're looking awesome.
Cool. It's great to be with you guys tonight. Thanks for the kind words, by the way. That was a really nice introduction, and frankly, I felt honored and privileged to have a chance to share a car with you and get to know you. You're a great addition to our team. So thanks for being part of this. Corey, before I launch into my remarks tonight, I'm showing just the ASEA symbol on my screen. And I thought I'd just check if that's the case with you guys. Can you see me as the full screen, or do you see the ASEA brand?
So I see you as the full screen. When I talk, I see the ASEA brand.
I see. Okay, good. So sorry, if I'm too big of a screen for you, Corey. Chuck takes therapy for moments like this, so hopefully you'll be all right. It's great to be with you guys tonight. I'm excited to have an opportunity to share some of my feelings with you guys this evening, and share some insights about leadership and how you might be thinking about your leadership journey at the company. It looks like there's somewhere upwards between 400 and some odd participants. I wish I could see your faces. You guys mean a lot to me, and I take such a great energy transfer from all of you guys when I get a chance to see you. And so I first want to start by telling you, I really do say sincerely how much I love and appreciate all of the people in the field that have given their time and energy and talents to ASEA, and particularly for being here tonight. I appreciated Corey's reference to small sacrifices, small even short-term sacrifices, paying a dividend and yield over time and making a difference. And I believe that's been the case in my life, and I appreciated Corey saying that. So Corey, thanks again for the introduction. Guys, I got to thinking about how I wanted to position this tonight, and I'd like to have a conversation with you about the journey I've been on with my dad and the mentor he's been for me, and in particular helping me to think and understand strategy a little bit better. And most of you know, over the years, we've certainly trumpeted this from the stage, that Dad ran strategy for Kraft Foods and has a really remarkable background in strategic planning and execution, and in business leadership in general. But I'd like to take you back, gosh, 25, 24 years, and tell you a little story about the framing of how Dad started to teach me some principles that I hope tonight I can transfer to you. I should tell you, as you look to time manage, it's a little after 7 here in Utah, and I hope to maybe spend 30 to 45 minutes with you guys. Hopefully that's not too much time, and that you'll get a chance to take away some good things from this discussion tonight. So as a young executive, I was put in a position of a national director for about 160-year-old company out in New York. And I felt overwhelmed. I definitely felt like I was in a job that was greater than my capacities. And so I got on a plane and I flew back to meet with my dad in Chicago. And I asked him to start teaching me how to think more strategically. And the way he framed it was, I want to give you a critical thinking path so that you can start to see and think like your boss, or ultimately like the CEO of your company might be processing and thinking. And so I fully committed to learning the process and engaged in that discussion with my dad over several months and even years. But I want to share specifically with you guys tonight what he taught me about the concept of strategy. I think it's a word that gets used a lot, and probably misused in terms of what it really represents. And oftentimes I think we mix it up with tactics. So if I was trying to fill a room tonight and said, my strategy to fill the room is this, it's probably more like there's a set of tactics that I'm going to do. And in my dad's vernacular, strategy is bigger than that. It's longer term by nature, in some cases more than 1 year, 2 years, could even be 3 years, but it's broader buckets, if you will. And maybe to help you understand this, I'll share with you, my dad used to walk around the house mumbling the definition of strategy under his breath. I remember him memorizing this years and years ago. And I finally one day I said, what do you keep saying? You keep repeating this phrase. And he says, I'm repeating my favorite definition of strategy. And I said, well, what is it? And he said, strategy is nothing more than how you leverage and capitalize on resources to gain and sustain a competitive advantage. And I'll say that again. He said, strategy is nothing more than how you capitalize on or leverage available resources to create or gain a sustainable advantage. And at the time, obviously, I didn't think that was too terribly compelling. But as I got older and I started to get into business, I started to think more on the notion of, okay, so how am I going to become more strategic? As a field leader at ASEA, these principles I'm going to teach you tonight, if you just took even an hour after this call and took some of the steps I'm going to share with you, I think it could materially alter your experience here at ASEA and your overall success. Not only here, I know many of you work in full-time positions in every possible industry, and I hope this may help you in those settings as well. So Dad memorized that definition years ago, and as he began to teach that to me back when I was a national director for this New York-based company, I really was struggling to grasp it. And so I tried one time to write strategy, and I took it to my dad for like the checking in with the professor, and he just destroyed me. He's like, you're missing this altogether. And I said, well, okay, you're the Wizard of Oz, so teach me again. And he would try and teach me. And finally, he said, Tyler, there's an exercise I want you to go do. And I kind of want to do this virtually with you guys. So do me a favor, grab a piece of paper, preferably paper and pen. I'll take an iPad if you've got it. If you've got a laptop, you can do it there as well. But I'd challenge you to do this exercise with me tonight and maybe spend a little time thinking through this. So you say, okay, Dad said, okay, Tyler, here's what I want you to do. I want you to make an enumeration, a list of every available resource that you have that you can leverage or capitalize on to gain or create a sustainable competitive advantage. And he said, don't come back to me with just a few things. I really want you to think about what are all of the resources that you have at your disposal. And he gave me a caution that most people who aren't being terribly strategic about what it is they're trying to accomplish don't even know the resources that they do have available. So he said, I anticipate that this is going to take you a while to really dig in and try to identify and find them. So I took that counsel to heart, and I went back to my office and I started making a list. And what is kind of a neat story, what happened, and I'll share it as just a reference point for you guys. But I found online on my company at the time, intranet, the kind of internal web architecture they had, I found a charter document that was one of these classic corporate documents that few people actually take the time to read. But because I had this assignment from my dad to be able to articulate all of the resources, I took this charter document and I started going through it. I remember printing it, and it was a fairly lengthy PDF doc. And I started thinking, wow, this is a good outline of all the resources. And I'll give you a couple examples of what happened. So I found departments in my company that I didn't even know existed. I'll give you an example. The marketing department had a recruiting division that was diversity recruiting. And they had people and staff there that were just to support us in recruiting into emerging diverse markets. So at the time I was living in Phoenix, and I was, really thinking about, okay, this is an interesting resource. So what I did is I started to explore them. I started to research them, and I started making phone calls. And I said, okay, I'm reaching out. I'm a director here in Arizona, and I've been reading a little bit about this division. Is it still there in the company? Remember, this is 1740 Broadway, huge company. And sure enough, I would meet these people, and they'd say, wow, we're so glad you called. Let us tell you what we do. And I found out, for example, there was a Hispanic emerging market group there that's whole goal was to support the development of building teams. Now, remember, I was in the financial advisory business, And you can imagine I was in Phoenix, and I'm a native Spanish speaker. So there was a Hispanic version of this. There was a woman's version of this where there was diversity initiatives to make sure that we were growing women into financial services. It's a super neo-universal male-dominant industry, and there's just not enough women that are doing financial services. So here I am listing all of these things out that I didn't even know existed. I was finding pockets of resources, and my list started getting longer and longer and longer. And then I started subsuming them under broad headings. And I started saying recruiting, or I started talking about different resources. And before you knew it, I had this pretty notable list. And I went back ready to show my dad that I had done the homework assignment. And at that point, we started talking through it. And he started telling me, now let's talk about these resources. And I want you to think about these resources like an orange that you can squeeze to get orange juice. And he said, let's talk about them. And we started going through them. And sure enough, in my dad's version of pick 3, 4, no more than 5 areas of focus or emphasis, and they should link to pools of resources. So that's what I did. And I set out with an intent statement that I was going to be the #1 diversity-based financial services office in this company. Now, this is a New York domiciled 160-year-old company. I was in Phoenix. And so I set out with an intent statement to be the premier entry-level financial services organization in Phoenix, with a particular emphasis on emerging community-based diversity markets. And I specifically chose 3 markets: the Asian American market, I chose the Hispanic market, and I chose the women's market. And what was interesting about it is, because I had done my research about where these resources were, I began to reach out and partner with those resources in a very compelling way. And one of the interesting things that happened, I'll tell you really quickly, I've shared this story a few times from the stage, was I started reaching out, and I made a list of every publication in the city of Arizona, Phoenix, that was tied to, for example, the women's market. And it was this huge range of publications that I found, local level, grassroots stuff. And I started reaching out to these folks that were serving this community. And I would share with them that my intent, my strategy was to focus on building the premier entry-level financial services shop for women in the Phoenix area. And I built relationships. And as I would build these relationships, I would partner back with my corporation in New York, and I would sponsor advertising. I would sponsor events. And I started pouring resources into the Phoenix community because I had found these resources that I could leverage and capitalize on so that I could create a competitive advantage. And I ended up asking this group of people from the Arizona Women's News, which was a grassroots kind of commerce development group, really focused on supporting women. And they came and met with me in my office. I said, I want to be involved with your movement. I want to help. This is my vision and this is my strategy. And I have some resources that we can leverage from my corporate office in New York in support of your initiatives. Long and short of it is, those 2 ladies ended up officing in my office. They asked for office space and I got it approved. I don't know how I did it. I probably got in some trouble doing it, but I got them approved and they moved into my office. And they came to me and said, Tyler, we've been researching and there's no women's chamber of commerce. There's a Native American chamber of commerce. There's a Hispanic chamber of commerce. There's all these different enterprises. We cannot find a women's chamber of commerce. And I said, that's impossible. Every major group has one. And they said, there isn't one. This was in the early 2000s. And so they said, would you help us? And I said, 100%. So we set out to build the Arizona Women's Chamber of Commerce. We launched it. I was on the front cover of the Arizona Women's News. I hosted that whole launching in my office. And ultimately, they came back to me about 6 months later and said, we're moving to Washington, D.C. We're going to launch the U.S. Women's Chamber of Commerce. There isn't one. Can you help us? I taught them these same strategy principles I'm sharing tonight about leveraging resources and key advantages. And I sat for the better part of 7 years as probably the only male advisor on the U.S. Women's Chamber of Commerce, the USWCC. And we launched all of that right there in Arizona. And I was participating in it. You can imagine, oops, my lights just went off here. Hopefully you guys can see me. You can imagine that I had a huge amount of success recruiting financial advisors in Phoenix that were females, that were professional women, when they started to realize that I was also on the advisory council and a founding partner of the U.S. Women's Chamber, and in this case, the Arizona Women's Chamber. We had remarkable success developing out that one strategy. And it came from a simple exercise my dad asked me to do. I went out and I actually found the picture of the Arizona Women's News from years ago. I was laughing. I'm getting older, but I found it, and it was a remarkable experience that came from one little exercise. Now let's pivot. Okay, it's 7:20. I want to challenge you guys to think for a minute about your strategic advantages and what it is that you have that you can leverage. Thank you, sir. And I want you to say, okay, so what are my resources that I have that I can leverage? What are they? And let's start thinking about those. Pull out your piece of paper and take a second. I want you to, as quickly as you can, write them down. And I'm trying to see if I can get my text messages to show up here. So maybe you guys could even shoot some out on the messaging side of it, but I'm not seeing it. So maybe I can't do that with you guys. But I want you to think about the resources you have. So let's talk about them for a minute. Maybe the first thing that, oh, participants are raising their hands. Sorry, guys, I'm trying to see this. Okay, I see some hands raised, but I don't know how to see more there. So I'm waving back at you. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with these. Corey, maybe you know, there's lots of people raising their hands here. In the meantime.
Sorry to cut in. The settings on here don't allow for chat or for.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
No, that's great. I just wondered if I needed to do something with their hands. So if you're chatting, we can't see your actual messages, but let's talk a little bit about this principle. Use your piece of paper and write this down. So I want you to stop and say, what are the resources? And I would even add to this, what are the competencies, resources that I have access to at ASEA that I could become more strategic about leveraging? Let's think about it. So what are some of those resources? Clearly product, right? And the product set. What about all the videos that are out there, all of the technology tools that we have? Let's talk about upline. What about my upline support? And that could basically foreshadow a host of other key resources. It could mean meeting cadence, the ability to access that upline for a three-way call, the ability to take advantage of other types of training calls that are going on all the time. And you start to sit down, and if you remember, my dad didn't like my first exercise. He's like, you're not digging deep enough. You need to become familiar with the resources that are out there. These are the oranges that you can squeeze to make juice. And he was pressing me to say most people are not being strategic because they're not taking the time to clearly identify what are all the resources out there that I could take full advantage of to make orange juice, the oranges I could squeeze to make juice. So I want you to think about some things with ASEA as you go on this journey with me tonight. I want you to list the resources you have. And then what I want to suggest to you is that you probably are just scratching the surface. Remember, I found that charter document and I started going through that document. I was like, wow, I didn't know we had this department. I didn't know we had this. I didn't know we had this. Now, I'm not asking you to take 10 days off of work or any other key responsibility and go through all this stuff, but I am saying a good hour or 2 hours or even 30 minutes a night for a week and starting to look through all of these different resources will give you a landscape of things you can squeeze and leverage to your successful advantage. And so similar to the U.S. Women's Chamber for me, which came off a simple concept of going out and saying, what are the resources I can take advantage of? I found a pool, a bucket of money, and a team of people that were deeply committed to and incentivized to go out and help grow diversity markets. And so I saw that as an opportunity, as a leverageable resource to my own advantage. And so I said, let's do this here in Arizona. And we did. We were very, very successful doing that. In your case, let's talk about some of these. Let me give you an example of one that I would write down if I were in your shoes. So if you sat back and asked me, beyond paying your commissions and your compensation, what's the thing that this company spends the most money on an annual basis? If you looked at my operating budgets and said, gosh, what does the company spend the most money on? Well, it's likely events. So I might say, wow, that's a big resource. We have a company in ASEA that's spending 7 figures multiple times over to host a series of events. Some of those might be incentive trips. Some of those might be annual events like Ascent or Envision. But if you said, I want to tap into that orange orchard, I want to know how to squeeze some of those oranges to my own advantage. Using my dad's definition of strategy, he would say strategy is nothing more than how you leverage or capitalize available resources to create and sustain a competitive advantage. So you say, how would I use that one resource of the company pouring millions of dollars into their event infrastructure to grow my little business in Nashville, Tennessee, or wherever you find yourself? And if you sat back and thought about it, there's a beautiful pattern and a cadence of those dollars and how they're spent that if you tapped into it, just like I tapped into those diversity market recruiting dollars and had great success, I think you'd be surprised at how quickly you could accelerate your business if you got a little more strategic about, hey, I'm going to take advantage of these resources the company gives to us and how to leverage those. So let's think about it. What's going to happen here in 3 or 4 weeks is we're going to be down at convention. Our annual convention event is an absolutely massive strategic advantage for you if you learn how to take full advantage of it. That's a resource you need to sit down and think, how am I leveraging this? Have you been to it before? If you have you been there alone? If you've been there alone and you're going and getting re-energized, I think you're taking part of the strategic advantage, but not all of it. So if it were me, I'd say, okay, I have this convention. It typically happens in that September range. What happens at convention? Convention historically is the unveiling of and the promotion of a new set of strategic resources that I can now squeeze to create advantage. It can take the shape of product. It can take the shape of tools. It can take the shape of training. It can take the shape of upline training and mentoring, of all sorts of things. So you say, how am I leveraging just that one event, that one 7-figure party for 3 straight days, which is training, inspiration, motivation, access to leadership, upline and corporate, that gives me an IV right into the culture of the company. And it's also unveiling a new suite of tools, support, products, whatever it may be in a given year, aimed at layering up and levering up your ability to capitalize and advantage on, create advantage from those things. So start there. Now, what happens at convention? Clearly, it's an opportunity to celebrate accomplishment. Clearly, it's a recognition tool, but it's also a foreshadowing. We announce locations, for example, for events. We announce dates for events. And what it does is it starts to show you this cadence or rhythm that I think you might want to consider taking advantage of. So you say, okay, let's talk about how this might work. I'm gonna get more strategic about convention. Let's say you and I are just having a volley right now, and we're talking about how would I be more strategic as a field leader? Well, first thing, what are the resources? In this example, we start with convention, and I say, let's talk about targeting a number of people that need to be there, regardless of rank, even regardless of the amount of time they've been there. What's your target to get people there? Once someone's there, we all know that leaders are created and the visions are accelerated in these environments. So people are going to come and have an experience. There's no doubt about it. But then what? Do they just return home? And you start saying, I'm going to leverage the fact that from convention, we announce the locations and we also announce the qualification criterion for, let's say, Ascent. And literally upon their return, that middle rank incentive of Ascent the clock starts to tick on that. So I might say, you know what, that's a fairly big resource being spent at the company that I get to tap into strategically. One of my core strategies is to leverage the event infrastructure at ASEA to help me accelerate my business. Okay, I'm going to go to convention with a target number of people there. And then once they've announced this Ascent location for the following year, and then I'm going to spend some time really familiarizing myself with the criterion upon which someone can have certain expenses paid for, in some cases a large percentage of it paid for, to be there. Now that starts the clock ticking probably until March or April, end of first quarter, beginning of second quarter. There's an example of getting more strategic. What else do I know is going to happen? Well, getting my team excited at convention, rolling into their minds and clearly talking about Ascent and what that means for them, depending on where they are on the rank infrastructure. I might leave that event and then point them to Envision, which we know is a first quarter event in the United States, an event aimed at a next touch point. So I might say there's a lot of money that gets spent at Envision. It's not my money, it's the company's money. And I want to squeeze that orange into orange juice. So I'm going to say, how could I be more strategic about the cadence between convention and the Envision event in the first quarter, while what's happening? While I'm driving people and keeping track and helping them keep the score as they go to qualify for Ascent. So that window of time, I would be saying, wow, there's dollars being spent there. How do I leverage those? Then I get around the corner of the year into January, February, March, and there's a regional Envision events where I can say, here's another great cultural touch point to reconnect and re-energize the team while they're journeying forward towards qualifying for Ascent. Again, for those folks that are in that right middle rank to be running for that. Once I get to Ascent, right, that qualification period ends around that same time that you've had that experience with Envision. And now what? That qualification period's over. Hopefully those folks have qualified, and I'm pointing them now to the Ascent experience, which is an incredible incentive opportunity. It's fun in the sun. It's a great opportunity to connect and build the core sense of your team. And if you got 2, 3, 4, 5 people at that qualified event, you're going to have a team growing. So you say, I'm going to leverage that. Now, typically towards the end of that a window of time to qualify for Ascent, there's regional promotions that get thrown out. Some of the things that Corey was sharing tonight on our opening announcements, great examples of resources that can be leveraged to build this strategic advantage and this cadence around the full calendar year. They come to Ascent, and then you say, you know what, I'm going to leverage the regional incentives that might be going on and drive people towards rank advancement, which they can then recognize as they move into that convention window. And that's just a simple one example of how to think more strategically about these resources that are put out there. What I find is people love to come to our conventions, but sometimes I wonder if they're sitting back and saying, how do I leverage that 12-month cycle of promotions, incentives, and events where I know ASEA is dropping millions of dollars to create an experience that I can claim as my own? The abuse of possessive pronouns is allowed. This is your event. You can say, this is my event. I want to invite you to my event. And it is. If you're part of ASEA, this is yours to leverage. So what's my dad's definition? How do you capitalize on and leverage available resources to create sustainable advantage, sustainable competitive advantage? And you say, you know what? I haven't been taking full advantage of that event infrastructure. And I challenge it. Now, what have I just done? That's one thing. That is just one thing. And it's a big one. And what does it correlate with? It correlates with where we spend the majority of our money as a company. Not the majority, but a very large percentage of our budgets go towards creating those event experiences. What about incentives? You know, I haven't even talked about the incentive trips, for example. Let's talk about the diamond trip or even the ambassador trip. Those are things that you can use in the near term if someone's close enough to consider making a run at qualifying for those events. Those are significant motivating forces. They're resources that are there for you to squeeze and take advantage of. It may be that you're going to leverage it for yourself. And then if you are qualifying or have qualified, think about it in terms of who on my team would be really driven and motivated just around those trips and incentives and how I can take full advantage of that. Now, if you did take a minute to scratch down some resources, you probably listed your upline support. Well, in between those major corporate events, what's so amazing about this company is there are upline teams that are out there with their own cadence of resources they're supporting with. Though that cadence can take the form of daily calls, it can be weekly activities, it could be weekly events, it could be monthly or quarterly regional events that are upline sponsored. And many of you are taking advantage of those. And if you just zoomed out for a minute and looked at 12 months stacked out and said, I'm just going to rethink my field strategy as a field leader, as my strategic leadership journey, I'm going to say, you know what? I want to rethink the next 12 months as it relates to events, incentives, and even upline support and that cadence and rhythm of how your upline is managing their business. Think about that for just a minute. And then pause for a second and say, gosh, that's just one strategic thought process we went through. Now, I started the call by saying what I find is most organizations, most people in organizations can't even articulate to you where these pockets of resource live. It can take the shape of many, our legacy, our reward LRP programs. You could say fast forward. What about that as a resource that you can leverage? Am I really thinking clearly about how to take advantage of that? This VIA promotion that's going on, promotions, again, how familiar are you with those and how are you squeezing that orange to create juice in your business? I think what you'll find is there's more dusty keys on the piano of corporate and available resources, upline, field, and corporate resources than you're playing. You tend to play the same few finger chords on that piano. There's 88 keys, and I want you to start thinking more strategically about, am I really playing the right keys strategically as a field leader? Or do I kind of tend to play the first or second keys that I've always played and wondering why my business isn't accelerating and taking off into different directions? And what I'm trying to suggest to you is a tactical person that gets zoomed in on just a single couple of tactics every once in a while needs to zoom out and say, am I taking full advantage of the resources I have around me that foreshadow or prefigure strategic advantage? And you know what I think, honestly? You'd be blown away if you did this Vertus exercise. If you just said, I'm just going to take an hour, sit down and list all the resources. Maybe you'd say, I don't even know that I know them all. Well, shoot an email to Corey. I bet Corey would take a response from somebody and say, hey, let me help you think through the various resources that you have that you can take advantage of. Karen, Justin, Field. Now, they don't want everybody on this call to send them an email at the same time. But what I'm getting at is if you don't know what they are, start to investigate. We have people that have won incentives that have actually qualified for an incentive that they weren't really aware of. And I keep saying to myself, well, yeah, that means we're failing at communicating all of the resources that are out there. So the message I wanted to share tonight is simply this. Good field leadership and good strategic leadership says, I'm going to become really aware of all of the resources that are around me that are sitting there waiting for me to lever them and to capitalize on them so I can create competitive advantage and start to win and reach my full potential. And it's been my experience that most people are just playing a few keys on that 88 key piano. And I want them to zoom out, blow the dust off those keys and say, okay, so what is fast forward? I've never done that before. I've never leveraged that before. Okay. And sit down and say, you know what, how could that be leveraged in my business more intelligently? Okay, yeah, what is the event structure? How does that cadence work? Who is and what is my upline support infrastructure? What's the cadence of meetings? How do I tap into that resource to create advantage? And really, I'm not talking about pushing the clutch in and what I call talking about. I'm not asking you to become a philosopher about strategy. I'm asking you to take an hour one night or maybe over a couple of nights and say, okay, let's get a little bit more intelligent about how I want to attack this. What are the resources that I have access to that I can leverage? And what's interesting is if you do it right, you'll begin to see patterns in those resource buckets. Like I said, events, promos, and incentives. You could say that's just its own bucket. And Dad would call that a strategy. And he only gives you 3, 4, or 5. So he would say, you have a strategy around events, promos, and incentives. And you could say upline, field, and corporate. How am I going to leverage, capitalize on events, promos, and incentives? And then you would sit down and you pull out a calendar. If you're like me, I like to see the full year calendar at one glance. And I'd say, okay, let's layer in the big events. Now let's layer in the regional events. Now let's layer in the upline events and what's going on there. And then you start getting a cadence of calls and you get a cadence of meetings and you start saying, wow, there's this really nice cadence and rhythm to the year. And I'm not writing the check for the hotel. I'm not writing the check for the stage and the lighting and the music guy and the audio guy. And you say, this is smart. I need to take advantage of this. And if you're not, I always tell people you can't leave a room you were never in, right? You got to get into this room. You got to step into it and say, I want to be in this room and I want to figure this out. Once you learn how to tap into those strategic resources and make them work for you instead of you working for them, now you're getting more strategic. And as my dad was teaching me this, he was pressing me all the time to say, okay, so get more strategic. Think about where are the resources that you can take advantage of to create competitive advantage. And if somebody ever said, so what is strategy? It is the how, and it's how you're going to leverage resources to achieve your objectives. It's how you're going to get where you want to go by taking full advantage of the objectives. I'm glad you guys are noticing that our lights automatically turn off. That shows that we're environmentally sensitive. So I'm just going to leave the lights off unless Corey wants to come down and turn back on. I want you guys to know that I wish I could spend more time. I wish I could workshop with you guys and help you see this and we could do this together. I don't particularly like talking to a screen by myself, but I hope you're grasping this notion that strategy invites you to think about your resource sets differently. And then you can start listing them out and looking at the landscape of those resources and getting more deliberate about which ones you intend to use. Now, thank you, sir. So how will you do that? Well, again, I get a little nervous talking about strategy because I'm not trying to make this more difficult than it is, but you have duplication systems that your teams are using. As I mentioned earlier, you have field calls that are being hosted and sponsored. You have upline leaders that you can take advantage of. I love the culture we've created here that enables cross-line interaction where you can actually reach out to someone. I'll tell you one of the great secrets, and maybe I've got time for one more quick story on this one, is the upline leadership in this company, the ones that have done it, the ones that are doing it, the ones who you'd love to trade tax returns with. These folks are accessible to you. They want to share their insights, as particularly if you're in their downline, but not exclusively if you are. I've seen these folks lean forward and want to help. And I went to a convention early on in my career in financial services, very, very similar to these events that we host here. And I had this unique opportunity to interview the top 10 producers of my company. We were challenged to do a small charitable activity during the week. And we said, you know what, let's do? Let's interview the top 10 producers in this company. And let's compile it in a little book. And we'll sell it at the last night event, kind of like the gala event. And we'll give the money to charity. We gave it to Ronald McDonald House. At the time, we were just doing it to have an initiative that week that was charitable, but it proved to be a high impact thing in my life because I went and sat with those leaders. And I said, hey, I'm doing a little charity gathering. I'd like to ask you 10 or 15 questions. I'll record it. And then I didn't sleep much that week because I'd go back to my hotel room, throw a pair of headphones on. It was a cassette tape, and that dates me. And I would sit there and I would listen to them talking and answering these questions. And I asked them questions. Did you ever think about quitting? When did you turn the corner on your career? When did you start playing offense instead of defense? And I listened to these upline leaders, and you know what they're telling me? They were matching some of my feelings of inadequacy or the challenges I was facing, and at the same time giving me these nuggets and these secrets of how to succeed. One of those guys took me under his wing as a financial advisor and met me at that simple event, said, you know what, I really like you. I want to work with you. And he became my personal mentor, one of the top producers in my entire company, and I started to learn from him. So I'm amazed at these events when I see a Trish, a Denny, an Alan, any number of our leaders, Terry, others like that, that are sitting at these meetings. And I want to say, boy, if I was at this meeting, I'd come to Terry and say, you know what would it take for me to get a few minutes and sit down and say, can I ask you just 5 or 6 questions? I don't want to waste people's time. And I don't want to be a war story guy. I just want to sit down and say, I really want to learn how to do this the way you've done it. Can you share some of the secrets that you've given to others and help me with that? That's a good example of a strategic focus on upline support and leaders, even crossline. And I want to learn from these people. They know something. They're doing something that I have yet to master, and I want to learn that from them. So zoom back out with me. What's the message tonight? The message is, what is strategy, right? What is strategy? Strategy is nothing more than how you capitalize on and leverage available resources to create sustainable competitive advantage. You're going to then say, well, if that's the case, I better know the resources I have around me that I can leverage and capitalize on. And what I'm telling you is most people don't take the time to figure that out. And do I think it should be this extended, protracted, brain damaged event? No, I think you should take an hour. I think it might take you a couple days for a week where you're half an hour a day and you say, I'm just going to reach out. I'm going to talk to my leaders. I'm going to talk to upline folks. I'm going to go through the internet and the back office and our webpage and all the other things that are out there that can kind of start to signal to me the edges of the puzzle of all these different resource pieces I have. And then I'm going to start jigsawing those together. And I'm going to say, you know what, I can see how I could take advantage of this and that it would help me to be more strategic about how I want to grow my business. So again, don't make it harder than it is, but please don't dismiss the fact that I bet right now, if I gave you a blank piece of paper and I asked you to list the resources, and then I had a comprehensive list here, my guess is there's 30, 40, 50% of what's available for you to take advantage of you may not even be familiar with. And at some level, that's a problem for both of us. That means I'm not doing my job as a founder and leader in this company to make sure you know about it. And maybe in some ways, you're maybe riding the clutch a little too much on figuring that out on your side. You've got to lean into it and say, what are the resources I can take advantage of? And the really, really smart strategic leaders are the ones who can tell you where all the corners are and where all the shadows are. I found the diversity recruiting department in my company, and I asked, how many leaders and managers are you working with? And they said, very few reach out to us. We don't get a lot of calls from people. We're thrilled to be helping you in Phoenix. We think it's a great market. I ended up building the best Hispanic American market outside of LA. I had one of the best offices for premier entry-level folks, and same with the women's market. We crushed that market. And also Asian American. I ended up singing karaoke with the Korean American Women's Association. I mean, if you can imagine that, 20 years ago, because I'd go out and make inroads to these different markets with what? With the resources of New York City's diversity markets support. So I would go out and say, I can provide support for the Korean American Women's Association. I'd love to come speak at your event. I'd love to sponsor something. And I met a ton of people in those marketplaces. So makes some sense to you is as you start thinking about where the resources are in this company, how you can squeeze those oranges to make juice that supports your business. We want you to do that. We want you to take full advantage of these resources we have. The good news is there's plenty of oranges and you can't take all the juice. We want you to take as much as you can. So I hope that's a helpful concept for you to consider. And if you want to make it really practical, hang up tonight, get off this call, and just sit there and think about the resources you have. And if you get stuck, then start digging a little bit, because you got your VO, you got your back office, you got a whole bunch of technology tools and what we built with Jixity and other things. You've got Genie, and you start going, wow, technology, associate support. I can even grow markets into Europe. I can reach out to the teams that are over in Europe and say, how do I build somebody over there? What if I want to grow my business into Europe? Sometimes we don't think that way, but there's people there waiting to help you and saying, here's some ideas that you may want to build. So sometimes we just get a little linear and we get a little myopic about what our resource advantages are and how to take clear advantage of them. And I just want to challenge you tonight to think a little more strategically. And if there are resources that are dusty that you're not taking full advantage of, I challenge you to think a little differently about how to be more strategic instead of maybe tactically just doing the same thing. Now, I know the Trishas of the world will tell you, you don't have to be a rocket scientist. You just have to be consistent. And in no way am I countering the notion of doing the small things on a daily basis. I'm not trying to make you a philosopher in this process. I am saying there are some resources out there you probably aren't taking full advantage of. And that's what strategy is all about. It's that simple. So listen, I've had a great time thinking about this and sharing this. I know I've been doing 90 with my hair on fire, so sorry if this was a little fast, but I did want to try to finish in about 40 to 45 minutes, and we're right close at that mark. I'm grateful to my dad for teaching me the concept of strategy. And strategy is nothing more than how you're going to leverage, capitalize, and take full advantage of available resources so you can create advantage that you can sustain, that helps you to win in the marketplace. And if we started getting a little bit more careful and deliberate about how to take advantage of resources that others are offering to us in the name of upline, company, technology, tool sets, tools, video, and you name it, there's a broad list. I think you could get a little more strategic and you'd be much more dangerous in the marketplace going out there and much more confident. So that's my challenge to you guys tonight, is to think about your leadership journey as it relates to strategy. And strategy is how you squeeze those oranges to make juice. Go out there and find the orchards inside of ASEA and start pulling those oranges down and say, am I really doing this strategically, or am I just trying this out just a little bit? Can't leave a room you were never in, so this is the way you get in. Love you guys. I really, really do. So thankful to be associated with such magnificent people. It's amazing to me as I get around the country and around the world, the joyful thing it is for me to see beautiful, wonderful, kind, intelligent, capable people that are so generously offering their talents, their time, and their energy to ASEA. And that's you. That's all of you. I'm so, so thankful to associate with you and just express my love and gratitude and appreciation to you as you journey forward in becoming the great leaders that you're destined to become. Corey, thanks for letting me host. I think I'm supposed to close this call, so I'll just bid everybody farewell and wish you the very best as you continue on your journey, and so look forward to seeing you at our great Strategic Advantage event here in just a few weeks down in Vegas. Thanks, guys.